Wednesday, 8 a.m. at Copex Group. The meeting began under an atmosphere of tension among the company's 5 product development teams. Every team was nervous as they waited for their turn to present their product ideas to the executive board. Sitting among her teammates, Destiny clasped both hands together and silently prayed that her idea would finally be recognized. For more than a year and a half, she had worked on a new synthetic leather material for handbags. She had traveled to suppliers, conducted research, and refined every stage of the process. If successful, the new material would significantly increase the company's profits. Finally, the results were announced. The executive board is pleased to announce that the product selected for the company's 5-year strategic investment program belongs to Department Manager Lena's team. Everyone in the room applauded, including Destiny. After all, she had been part of Lena's team since the day she joined the company. But her happiness didn't last long. Right after the announcement, Lena accepted all the credit for the project without mentioning Destiny's name a single time, even though every idea and every stage of the development had come from her. Destiny's 2 close coworkers, Laura and Eric, couldn't hide the unfairness they felt on her behalf. They looked at Lena's smiling face, then turned toward Destiny. She sat there with one hand covering her forehead while the other crushed a plastic water bottle until water spilled onto the table. As soon as the meeting ended, Destiny immediately asked to meet Elliot, the company's CEO, to make it clear that the project and the idea had been hers. Elliot responded indifferently. "Destiny, why does that matter? Lena's team won. Everyone on the team is getting a raise and a bonus. Isn't that enough?" The idea came from Department Manager Lena's team. Before Destiny could say another word, Elliot continued. "Just keep working hard. One day, when you've been with this company as long as Lena has, you'll become a department manager too." Destiny took a slow breath. "Mr. Elliot, Lena doesn't even have the complete process. Without the final surface treatment, the material won't last." Elliot didn't even look up from the documents on his desk. "That's something your department can figure out later." He reached for his phone before adding, "I have an important call. You can leave now." Destiny walked out with a feeling she had never experienced before. It wasn't because she didn't benefit from the project, but every part of it had been her idea. All she wanted was the respect and recognition for the value she had created. She returned to her desk, but she couldn't think about anything else. Only one thought remained in her mind. She would finish today's work. Tomorrow, she would submit her resignation. Destiny quietly returned to her desk without saying a word. Around her, the entire office was still celebrating. Co-workers walked in and out of Lena's office, congratulating her team for winning the company's biggest product investment project in 5 years. Some were already talking about the raises and bonuses that would come with it. Others joked about treating everyone to dinner that weekend. Destiny heard every conversation, but none of it mattered anymore. She opened her laptop and tried to continue working. But after reading the same email 3 times, she still couldn't remember a single word. Her eyes remained fixed on the screen while her mind stayed trapped inside the conference room. Every round of applause, every smile on Lena's face, every word Elliot had said, they played over and over again in her head. Across the office, Laura looked toward Destiny several times. She wanted to walk over, but with people constantly surrounding Lena's desk, she knew this wasn't the right moment. Eric noticed it too. He had never seen Destiny sit so still for so long. Usually, she was the busiest person on the team, always moving between meetings, prototypes, and suppliers. Today, she barely touched her keyboard. The afternoon seemed to move slower than ever. For the first time in 6 years, Destiny wasn't counting down the hours because she was excited to go home. She was counting them down because she simply wanted this day to end. As soon as the workday was over, Eric sent Destiny a message. "Want to grab dinner? Laura's coming too." Destiny looked at the screen for a few seconds before replying. "Sure." An hour later, the 3 of them were sitting in the same small restaurant they had visited countless times after finishing difficult projects. Normally, Eric was the loudest one at the table. Laura was always the first to start a conversation, and Destiny was the one laughing the hardest. Tonight, no one touched their food. After a long silence, Destiny finally spoke. "I went to see Elliot after the meeting." Laura immediately looked up. "What did he say?" Destiny let out a faint smile. "He said none of it mattered. She repeated everything Elliot had told her, that Lena's team had won, that everyone on the team would receive raises and bonuses, that she should keep working hard, that one day, after spending enough years at the company, she would become a department manager just like Lena. When she finished, Eric shook his head in disbelief. "This is ridiculous. Everyone knows that project was yours." Laura nodded. "You still have all your research files, don't you? Every draft, every revision. You should keep fighting." Destiny slowly shook her head. "I already tried. If the CO doesn't even care enough to hear me out, who else is going to listen?" Silence fell over the table once again. Destiny looked at the two people who had stood beside her through countless late nights and impossible deadlines before quietly saying, "Tomorrow, I'll submit my resignation." Neither of them tried to stop her. Eric simply nodded. "If that's what you truly want, then we'll respect your decision." Laura reached across the table and gently held Destiny's hand. "Whatever happens next, we'll always be on your side." For the first time since the meeting that morning, Destiny no longer questioned whether resigning was the right decision. She knew she was leaving the company, but she wasn't leaving behind the people who truly mattered. The next morning, Destiny arrived at Copex Group nearly an hour earlier than everyone else. The office was still quiet. Only a few lights were on, and the cleaning staff were finishing their morning routine. She walked slowly toward her desk, set her bag down, and looked around without saying a word. This was where she had spent the last 6 years of her life. Almost every corner of the office held a memory. She remembered her first day, when she was so nervous that she couldn't even find the meeting room until Lena smiled and showed her the way. She remembered the nights when the entire team stayed until midnight to finish important projects, sharing pizza and laughing to keep themselves awake. She remembered the excitement of launching a successful product, the satisfaction of solving difficult problems, and the pride she felt every time one of her ideas helped the company grow. Back then, she had truly believed she would spend her entire career at Copex Group. Those memories were real, and that was exactly why yesterday had hurt so much. She wasn't just leaving a company. She was leaving a place that had once felt like home. Destiny slowly stood up and walked through the office one last time. She paused outside the conference room where countless ideas had been presented over the years. She stopped by the sample workshop where she had spent so many evenings testing new materials. Finally, she returned to her desk and quietly smiled to herself. She would always be grateful for the 6 years she had spent here, but gratitude was no longer enough to make her stay. Destiny returned to her desk and slowly turned on her computer. She opened a blank document and rested her hands on the keyboard for a few seconds. She had imagined this moment many times since leaving Elliot's office the day before, but now that it was finally here, she felt surprisingly calm. She typed the title, Resignation Letter, then began writing. She thanked Copex Group for the opportunities it had given her over the past 6 years. She thanked her coworkers for everything they had shared together. She didn't mention Lena. She didn't mention Elliot. She didn't write a single sentence about what had happened at yesterday's meeting. She simply informed the company that she wished to resign in accordance with the terms of her employment agreement. When she reached the final line, she read the letter one last time before pressing the print button. A few seconds later, the printer quietly produced a single sheet of paper. Destiny picked it up, signed her name at the bottom, and carefully slipped it into a plain white envelope. She looked at the envelope for a brief moment, took a slow breath, then stood up from her chair. Without another moment of hesitation, she walked out of her department, holding the envelope firmly in her hands as she headed toward the Human Resources office. Destiny stopped in front of the Human Resources office and gently knocked on the door. "Come in," a voice answered from inside. She stepped into the room and placed the white envelope on the hour manager's desk. The woman looked up with a friendly smile before opening it. As soon as she saw the resignation letter inside, the smile slowly disappeared from her face. "You're re-signing?" she asked in surprise. Destiny nodded. "Yes." The hour manager looked at the letter again, almost as if she thought she had read it wrong. "Are you sure about this? You've been one of the company's strongest product development specialists. If this is about your salary or benefits, we can always discuss it." Destiny gently shook her head. "It isn't about the money." The hour manager remained silent for a moment before asking one last question. "Would you like a few more days to think it over? Sometimes people make decisions they regret after a difficult day." Destiny smiled politely. "I spent all of yesterday thinking about it. This isn't an emotional decision anymore. The hour manager slowly nodded. She signed the paperwork confirming that the resignation letter had been received, then stood up and extended her hand. I respect your decision. I truly hope everything works out for you. Destiny shook her hand with a grateful smile. Thank you. A few minutes later, an automated notification arrived in Elliot's inbox informing him that Destiny had officially submitted her resignation. He stared at the email for several seconds before picking up the phone. Could you ask Destiny to come to my office before she leaves? He said to his assistant. Tell her I'd like to speak with her one last time. A few minutes later, Destiny stood outside Elliot's office once again. After a light knock, she heard his voice from inside. Come in. Elliot looked up as she entered and gestured toward the chair in front of his desk. The resignation letter was already lying beside his laptop. I just received your resignation, he said. I didn't expect you to actually go through with it. Destiny remained calm. I've made my decision. Elliot leaned back in his chair. You're one of the strongest people in Lena's department. If this is about compensation, we can fix that. You'll receive the same raise and bonus as everyone else on the project. If necessary, I'll approve an additional salary adjustment myself. Destiny looked directly at him and quietly replied, It has never been about the money. Elliot frowned. Then what exactly are you looking for? Respect. The room fell silent for a moment. Destiny continued. I spent a year and a half building that project. I wasn't asking for a promotion. I wasn't asking for a bigger bonus. I only wanted my work to be acknowledged. Elliot folded his hands together. Destiny, you're taking this far too personally. In a company like this, projects belong to departments, not individuals. Lena is the department manager. She represents her team's achievements. That's how business works. Destiny gave a small nod, as if she had finally heard the answer she had been looking for. Then I think we're done here. She stood up from her chair. Elliot looked at her in surprise. You're really willing to throw away 6 years because of this? Destiny smiled politely. No, I'm leaving because after 6 years, I've realized this company and I don't believe in the same things anymore. She turned toward the door. Just before she walked out, Elliot spoke one last time. You'll regret this decision. Destiny paused for only a second before quietly answering, maybe, but I'd regret staying even more. Without looking back, she opened the door and walked out, knowing there was nothing left for her inside that office. When Destiny returned to her department, Lena was already standing beside her desk, as if she had been waiting. So, you really resigned, she said. Destiny simply nodded and began placing her belongings into a cardboard box. Lena watched her for a few moments before speaking again. You're making a very emotional decision. Destiny didn't respond. She carefully picked up a framed photo of Tom and Susan and wrapped it in a notebook before placing it inside the box. Lena let out a quiet sigh. You're talented, Destiny, but talent alone isn't enough. You also have to understand how this industry works. Destiny finally looked up. Lena met her eyes without the slightest hint of guilt. You should learn how this industry works. There was no apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that the project had ever belonged to Destiny. It was as if nothing unfair had happened. Destiny looked at Lena for several seconds before calmly replying, Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't belong in this industry. She picked up the box and walked away. As she reached the elevator lobby, Eric was already waiting there. Laura stood beside him with tears welling in her eyes. Neither of them had to ask what had happened. The cardboard box in Destiny's arms said everything. Eric stepped forward and hugged her tightly. I still think you're making the right decision, he said quietly. Laura hugged her next. Promise us this won't be goodbye. Destiny smiled through the sadness. It's only goodbye to Copex. Not to you two, Laura nodded. Then call us, no matter what happens next. I will, Destiny replied. She walked to the security desk, removed her employee badge, and placed it on the counter. After signing the final paperwork, the security gate slowly opened. Destiny took one last look at the Copex Group logo hanging in the lobby before walking out of the building. 6 years earlier, she had entered through those same doors believing she had found the company where she would build her future. This time, she walked away with nothing but a cardboard box and the courage to begin again. That evening, Destiny invited Tom and Susan out for dinner. When they arrived at the restaurant, Both of them were smiling. Tom thought his daughter wanted to celebrate after yesterday's big presentation, while Susan had even brought a small gift she had planned to give Destiny as a congratulations present. Seeing the excitement on her parents' faces, Destiny forced herself to smile and acted as if everything was normal. Throughout dinner, Tom talked about his day. Susan kept reminding Destiny to eat more, and neither of them noticed that their daughter had barely touched her food. Several times, Destiny tried to tell them the truth, but every time she opened her mouth, she couldn't bring herself to say the words. She didn't want to ruin the evening. Only after the dishes had been cleared away did she quietly put down her glass and look at her parents. "Mom, Dad, I quit my job today." The smiles on Tom and Susan's faces slowly disappeared. Neither of them interrupted. Neither of them rushed to ask questions. They simply looked at their daughter and waited for her to continue. Destiny took a deep breath before telling them everything from the beginning. She told them about the presentation. She told them how Lena had taken all the credit for the project she had spent more than a year and a half creating. She told them about going to see Elliot, hoping he would make things right, only to realize he never intended to listen. Finally, she told them about handing in her resignation that morning. When she finished, the table fell completely silent. Tom reached across the table and gently held his daughter's hand. Susan's eyes had already turned red. For the first time in 2 days, Destiny no longer had to pretend she was okay. She had finally come home. Tom remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "Do you remember what I told you on your first day at Copex?" Destiny gave a small nod. "You told me to work hard and never take shortcuts." Tom smiled gently. "And that's exactly what you've done for the past 6 years. No one can take that away from you." Susan reached across the table and held her daughter's other hand. "We've watched you leave the house before sunrise and come home long after dark. We've watched you cancel family dinners because of deadlines. We've watched you give everything you had to that company." Destiny lowered her head, trying to hold back her tears. "I don't know what to do anymore. Every time I think about another job, I'm afraid the same thing will happen again. I'm afraid to trust people with my ideas." Tom squeezed her hand. "Then don't rush back." Destiny slowly looked up. "You've spent 6 years taking care of that company," Tom said. "Now it's time to take care of yourself." Susan nodded. "Your father and I both have our pensions. We can take care of the household. You don't have to worry about finding another job tomorrow." Destiny stayed silent. Susan continued with a warm smile. "Take a year off. Travel if you want. Stay home if you want. Read books. Sleep in. Do whatever helps you become yourself again." Tears finally rolled down Destiny's face. She had spent the last 2 days pretending she was strong, but sitting in front of her parents, she no longer had to. Tom smiled reassuringly. "You've already proven that you're a hardworking woman. You don't have to prove it again. Right now, your only job is to heal." Destiny wiped away her tears and slowly nodded. That night, she made a promise to herself. For the next year, she wouldn't chase another job. She would give herself the time she needed to heal before deciding what came next. The first few days after leaving Copex Group felt strangely unfamiliar. For the first time in 6 years, Destiny woke up without the sound of an alarm clock. There were no unread emails waiting for her, no supplier asking for updates, no meetings to prepare for, no deadlines chasing her from the moment she opened her eyes. Yet instead of feeling relieved, she felt lost. Every morning, she woke up at the same time her body had grown used to, only to realize there was nowhere she needed to be. More than once, she instinctively reached for her phone to check her work email before remembering she no longer worked at Copex. She would quietly put the phone back down and stare at the ceiling for several minutes. Susan noticed everything but never mentioned work. Every morning, she simply prepared breakfast and called her daughter downstairs to eat. Tom would ask if she wanted to take a walk around the neighborhood or help him water the flowers in the backyard. Neither of them asked what she planned to do next. Neither of them asked when she would start looking for another job. They simply treated her like a daughter who had finally come home after being away for far too long. One afternoon, Tom came home carrying a small white rabbit in his arms. "Your mom and I thought the house felt a little too quiet," he said with a smile. Susan gently placed the rabbit into Destiny's hands. "Maybe the two of you can keep each other company for a while." Destiny looked down at the tiny animal resting peacefully in her arms. For the first time in days, a small smile appeared on her face. It wasn't enough to erase the emptiness inside her, but it was enough to remind her that healing didn't always begin with something big. Sometimes, it began with simply knowing that someone was quietly waiting beside you. A few weeks later, Destiny finally opened her laptop again. It was the same laptop she had used almost every day during her years at Copex Group. For a long moment, she simply stared at the screen before opening the folder that contained the project she had spent more than 18 months building. Hundreds of files filled the screen: research reports, material tests, cost analyses, supplier comparisons, prototype revisions. She slowly opened the original proposal and began reading through it from the very first page. Every paragraph reminded her how much passion she had once poured into the project. Without even realizing it, she picked up a notebook and a pen. A new idea suddenly came to mind. She quickly sketched a few lines beside one of the original designs, then paused. Her hand stopped moving. The memory of that Wednesday morning rushed back all at once. Lena standing on the stage. The applause. Elliot telling her it didn't matter who had created the idea. Destiny slowly closed the notebook. She closed the proposal. Then she shut her laptop completely. She sat there in silence for several minutes, staring at the dark screen in front of her. It wasn't that she had run out of ideas. She was simply afraid of creating another one. For the first time in her life, Destiny realized that what had been stolen from her wasn't just a project. It was the confidence to believe her ideas would still belong to her tomorrow. 1 year passed quietly. There was no dramatic turning point. No single day when Destiny suddenly woke up feeling like herself again. Healing came through the ordinary moments she had once been too busy to notice. Every morning, she fed the little white rabbit before making breakfast with Susan. In the afternoons, she often helped Tom take care of the small garden behind the house. She started exercising again, spent hours reading books she had bought years ago but never had time to open, and occasionally went hiking with her parents on weekends. Little by little, the constant anxiety inside her began to fade. She smiled more often. She slept through the night without waking up, thinking about unfinished work. Some days, she even caught herself laughing without realizing it. Tom and Susan noticed the change but never said anything. They understood that healing wasn't something to be measured. It was something to be lived. Looking at their daughter now, they could finally see the light slowly returning to her eyes. Destiny wasn't completely free from the past. The memories were still there, but they no longer controlled every thought she had. For the first time in a long time, she felt ready to think about tomorrow instead of constantly looking back at yesterday. One afternoon, while helping Tom organize the garage, Destiny came across an old sketchbook she had used years earlier. Curious, she flipped through its pages. Most of them were filled with rough handbag sketches, random material ideas, and notes she had written long before joining Copex Group. A small smile appeared on her face. She carried the sketchbook back to her room and placed it on the desk. Without thinking too much, she picked up a pencil and began drawing. At first, it was only a few simple lines. Then she adjusted the handle, changed the proportions, redesigned the stitching. Before she realized it, nearly 3 hours had passed. She sat back and looked at the drawing in front of her. It wasn't the same bag she had created for Copex. It was something entirely new. For the first time in more than a year, she didn't feel fear while putting an idea on paper. Instead, she felt excited. That evening, she reopened her laptop. This time, she didn't open the old proposal. She created a brand new folder. Then she began researching sustainable synthetic materials again. She compared new suppliers, read updated industry reports, and filled page after page with fresh notes. As she worked, one thought quietly returned to her mind. Maybe what Lena had stolen wasn't her ability to create. Maybe she had simply forgotten that no one could steal the mind that created the idea in the first place. That evening, Destiny waited until dinner was over before looking at Tom and Susan. "Mom, Dad, there's something I've been thinking about." Both of them looked at her. "I don't think I want to work for another company anymore." Tom quietly put down his cup. "What do you want to do?" Destiny took a slow breath. "I want to build my own brand." She paused for a moment before continuing. "The idea Copex took from me was never complete. I deliberately kept the core material technology to myself because I wanted to make sure the company truly believed in me before I revealed everything. Without that final piece, the material won't last the way it's supposed to. I know I can build something much better than what I presented there." She looked at her parents with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "I don't just want to make handbags. I want to build a brand that sells high-quality bags ordinary people can actually afford. Real leather bags are simply too expensive for many families. If I can create a sustainable material that looks and feels almost the same while costing much less, we can sell beautiful handbags for around $65 to $70 instead of $200. Customers get a better price. Manufacturers earn a healthier profit because the material costs less. Everyone wins." The dining table fell silent. Tom slowly stood up, walked into the bedroom, and returned a few minutes later carrying a savings passbook. He gently placed it in front of Destiny. "Your mother and I have been saving for retirement for many years." Susan smiled and nodded. "If this isn't enough, we'll mortgage the house." Destiny immediately shook her head. "No, I could never ask you to do that." Susan reached across the table and held her daughter's hand. "You're not asking us for anything," Tom smiled. "We're investing in the person we believe in the most." Tears instantly filled Destiny's eyes. A year earlier, she had lost her confidence because two people refused to believe in her. Tonight, the two people who loved her most were willing to risk everything because they never stopped believing she could stand back up again. At that moment, Destiny made her decision. She wasn't going to spend the rest of her life wondering what might have happened. She was going to build the company she had once hoped to find. The next morning, Destiny sent the same message to both Eric and Laura. "Can we have dinner tonight? I have something important to tell you." Neither of them asked what it was. Both simply replied with the same answer. Of course, that evening, the three of them met at the same neighborhood restaurant where they had shared countless dinners after work. This time, Destiny wasn't wearing an office badge, and for the first time in years, none of them had to think about going back to work the next morning. After ordering dinner, Destiny looked at the two people sitting across from her. "I've made my decision," she said. "I'm not looking for another job." Eric raised an eyebrow. "Then what are you going to do?" Destiny smiled. "I'm starting my own company." Both of them looked at her in surprise. Destiny continued, "You both already know what happened at Copex. The technology they took was never complete. I still have the final process, and now I finally know what I want to do with it." She smiled faintly. "This time, I don't want to build it for someone else's company. I want to build it for ours." She then explained the vision she had been carrying for more than 2 years. Instead of making expensive handbags for a small group of customers, she wanted to build a brand that offered beautifully designed bags made from sustainable synthetic leather at a price ordinary families could actually afford. "Real leather handbags are simply out of reach for a lot of people," Destiny said. "If we can make a material that looks and feels almost the same while costing much less to produce, we can sell a bag for around $65 to $70 instead of $200. Customers get a better product for less money, and manufacturers still earn a healthy profit because the material costs significantly less." Eric and Laura listened without interrupting. When Destiny finished, she took a slow breath before saying the part she had been worried about the most. "There's one problem." Both of them waited. "I can't pay either of you what Copex paid. Not in the beginning." Silence settled over the table for a few seconds. Then Eric smiled. "Were you really expecting money to be the reason I'd say no?" Laura laughed softly. "You've forgotten something. Destiny." "What?" Laura looked at her and smiled. "We worked beside you for 6 years. We know exactly what you're capable of." Eric nodded in agreement. "I don't believe in startups. I believe in you." Destiny felt her eyes begin to fill with tears. Just a year ago, the people she trusted most at work had refused to believe in her. Tonight, the first 2 people she invited were willing to leave stable careers simply because they believed in the person asking them to follow. A week later, the 3 of them officially began building the company. Destiny was responsible for the material. Eric took care of operations and production, and Laura focused on marketing and the website. There was only one position they still couldn't fill. They needed a handbag designer. Destiny posted a job listing, and over the next 2 weeks, dozens of applicants came in for interviews. Most of them had impressive portfolios and years of experience working for well-known fashion companies. Their designs were beautiful, but almost every candidate made the same mistake. They designed handbags first and worried about the cost later. Whenever Destiny asked how the design could be manufactured at a price that would allow the bag to sell for around $65 to $70 while maintaining healthy margins, the room usually fell silent. One by one, the candidates left. By late afternoon, only one interview remained. The receptionist knocked gently on the office door. "Your last applicant is here. Please send him in," Destiny replied. A young man walked into the room carrying a large portfolio case that looked almost too heavy for him. "Hi, I'm Noah." He looked nervous as he placed the case on the table. When he opened it, dozens of handbag sketches and several handmade paper prototypes filled the table within seconds. Before anyone could ask a question, Noah excitedly picked up the first design. "I know your brand wants to make beautiful bags that ordinary people can actually afford," he said. "So I didn't start by asking what would look the most expensive. I started by asking what people would actually carry every day." One by one, he presented his designs. Every bag had a purpose. Every pocket had a reason for being there. Every curve, handle, and zipper had been carefully considered, not just for appearance, but for manufacturing cost, production time, durability, and customer needs. At one point, Noah picked up one of his prototypes and said, "If we reduce this seam by half an inch, we can save material on every bag without changing the appearance. Across 10,000 bags, that becomes a huge cost reduction." Destiny looked at Eric and Laura. Neither of them said a word, but both were smiling. Before Noah had even finished his final presentation, Destiny already knew she had found the designer she had been searching for. 3 days later, the four of them officially registered the company. None of them rented an office downtown. None of them leased a modern workspace. To save every dollar they could, Tom emptied the old garage beside the house and offered it to the team as their first office. The concrete floor was worn. The walls needed fresh paint. The garage door squeaked every time it opened. It was far from perfect, but to Destiny, it was the beginning of something she could finally call her own. They bought secondhand desks and chairs from a local office liquidation sale. Eric spent an entire weekend assembling the furniture. Laura found a used coffee machine online because she insisted every company needed coffee before anything else. Noah turned one corner of the garage into a small design studio, pinning sketches across the wall until there was barely any empty space left. Destiny spent most of her time setting up a small materials lab with sample fabrics, testing tools, and notebooks filled with formulas. A few days later, the company's business registration certificate finally arrived. Laura carefully placed it inside a simple black frame and hung it on the wall. Underneath it, Noah unpacked a small box containing the very first metal logo they had ordered. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't even perfectly polished. But when Eric screwed it onto the wall above the entrance, everyone instinctively stopped working and looked at it in silence. Destiny smiled as she read the company's name for the very first time inside its own workplace. They still didn't have customers. They didn't even have a finished product. All they had was an old garage, a handful of secondhand furniture, and 4 people who believed they could build something worth fighting for. For now, that was more than enough. The following months became a cycle of constant trial and error. Every morning, the 4 of them arrived at the garage before 8 and rarely left before dark. Destiny focused entirely on perfecting the synthetic leather material. Every time a sample failed the durability test, she went back to the formula and started over. Some versions looked almost identical to genuine leather but cracked after a few weeks. Others were durable enough but felt too stiff in the hand. She refused to settle for either. "If someone spends $70 on one of our bags," she often said, "it should still make them smile a year later." While Destiny refined the material, Noah redesigned the bag again and again. Every evening, he covered the walls with new sketches, then tore half of them down the next morning because he believed they could be better. Sometimes he adjusted the shape of a handle by less than half an inch. Other times he redesigned an entire collection because one pocket wasn't practical enough. "A beautiful bag catches someone's attention," Noah explained one afternoon. "A practical bag is what makes them buy a second one." Eric took every prototype to manufacturers, discussing production costs, assembly methods, and quality control. If one stitch took too long to sew or one metal fitting increased the cost too much, he brought the feedback straight back to Noah and Destiny. Laura spent her days building the company's website, writing product descriptions, photographing every prototype and answering the same question over and over whenever someone discovered the brand online. "Why is your bag so much cheaper?" Instead of avoiding the question, Laura proudly explained their philosophy. They weren't using cheap materials. They were using a new sustainable material that cost less to produce than genuine leather while still delivering durability, comfort, and a premium appearance. Weeks turned into months. Prototype after prototype filled the shelves inside the garage. Some were almost perfect. Others were complete failures. But every failed version taught them something the previous one hadn't. Late one evening, Destiny picked up the newest sample and carefully ran her fingers across its surface. She looked at Noah, who immediately understood what she was thinking. "I don't want to change anything else," he said. Destiny smiled and slowly nodded. "Neither do I." For the first time since leaving Copex Group, they were all looking at a product they truly believed was ready for the world. 2 weeks later, everything was finally ready. Laura pressed the publish button, and the company's website officially went live. No countdown, no grand launch event, no media coverage. Just 4 people sitting inside a converted garage, staring at a laptop screen. "We're officially open," Laura said with a smile. Everyone looked at the website, then at each other. Nobody spoke. 5 minutes passed. Nothing happened. 10 minutes. Still nothing. Noah refreshed the dashboard again. 0 visitors. 0 orders. Eric laughed awkwardly. "Maybe people are still at work." Destiny smiled, but she couldn't hide the nervousness in her eyes. Months of work had led to this moment. They had built the company. They had perfected the material. They had finished the product. Now all they could do was wait for someone they had never met to trust them enough to click buy now. Almost half the day passed without a single order. The office grew quieter with every passing hour. Then, just as Laura was about to close her laptop and suggest everyone take a break, a soft notification sounded. "New order received." Nobody moved. Did that just happen?" Noah asked. Laura quickly opened the dashboard. Then her eyes widened. "It's real." She turned the laptop toward everyone. 1 customer. 1 handbag. Paid in full. For a brief second, the garage was completely silent. Then Eric jumped out of his chair. Noah laughed so hard he nearly knocked over his coffee. Laura threw her arms around Destiny. Destiny looked at the screen without saying a word. Her eyes slowly filled with tears. It wasn't because they had made $70. It was because somewhere out there, a complete stranger had looked at a brand nobody had ever heard of and decided it was worth believing in. Just then, Susan walked into the garage carrying a tray of freshly baked cookies. "Any good news?" she asked. Laura turned around with the biggest smile of the day. "We got our first order." Susan clapped her hands together. "Then let me help pack it." Everyone laughed. While Destiny carefully placed the handbag into its first branded dust bag, Susan folded the tissue paper, tied the ribbon by hand, and gently sealed the shipping box. Before closing the lid, Destiny slipped a handwritten thank you card inside. It read, "Thank you for believing in a small dream. We hope this bag becomes part of your story." That afternoon, the first package left the garage. It wasn't just the company's first sale. It was proof that their dream had officially found its first customer. The company's first order arrived at its destination 3 days later. From that moment on, everyone checked the website several times a day, hoping to see some kind of feedback. Every morning, Laura refreshed the review page before doing anything else. Every afternoon, Noah casually asked if the customer had left a comment yet, pretending he wasn't as anxious as everyone else. Even Susan had started asking the same question whenever she brought lunch into the garage. "Has your customer said anything yet?" 5 days passed, then 7. Still nothing. Destiny smiled and tried to stay patient, but deep down she wondered whether the customer had been disappointed. Then, on the morning of the 8th day, Laura suddenly shouted from across the room, "We got a review!" Everyone immediately gathered around her computer. The customer had given the handbag 5 stars. "I honestly didn't expect this quality for the price. The bag feels incredibly soft, looks much more expensive than it is, and after using it every day for a week, it still looks brand new. I'll definitely be buying another one." Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Noah quietly leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. Eric smiled and patted Destiny on the shoulder. Susan wiped away a tear before pretending she had dust in her eye. Destiny kept reading the review over and over again. She wasn't celebrating because they had received 5 stars. She was celebrating because someone who had never met them had confirmed that everything they had worked so hard to build was real. Before closing the page, she clicked reply beneath the review. "Thank you for believing in us. We promise to keep making bags worthy of your trust." It was only one review. But for a company that had started inside an old garage, it felt like the world had just said, "Keep going." The review didn't go viral overnight. It wasn't shared by celebrities or featured by any major media outlet. It simply spread the old-fashioned way. One customer recommended it to a friend. That friend bought one for her sister. A week later, another customer posted photos of the bag on social media, saying she had been carrying it every day and was surprised by how well it held up. More reviews slowly appeared. Some praised how soft the material felt. Others said they couldn't believe a bag at that price looked so refined. Several customers admitted they had originally assumed the quality would match the low price, only to discover the opposite. Laura began noticing a pattern in the website analytics. Nearly half of the new customers weren't coming from advertisements. They were arriving through direct links shared by existing customers. "People are recommending us to each other," she said one afternoon, unable to hide her excitement. Order by order, the business began to grow. 10 orders became 20. 20 became 50. Soon, the small garage was filled with stacks of shipping boxes waiting to be packed. Everyone worked from early morning until late at night. Noah was still sketching new ideas long after everyone else had gone home. Eric spent his days coordinating production and suppliers. Laura answered customer emails until midnight. Destiny moved between every department, helping wherever she was needed. Even Tom and Susan became part of the routine. Tom often drove to pick up materials from suppliers, while Susan continued wrapping every handbag by hand because she insisted the first customers deserved the same care as the first one. One evening, after squeezing past another pile of shipping boxes, Eric laughed and looked around the crowded garage. "I think we've officially outgrown this place." Everyone looked at the room they had proudly called their first office. Just a few months earlier, they had been praying for a single customer. Now they were running out of space because too many people believed in them. 6 months after launching the brand, the old garage could no longer keep up with the growing number of orders. Every available corner was filled with boxes waiting to be packed, rolls of material waiting to be cut, and finished handbags waiting to be shipped. One afternoon, Eric looked around the crowded space and smiled. "We've officially run out of room." A week later, Destiny signed the lease for a small workshop on the edge of the city. It wasn't large, and it certainly wasn't impressive, but it was the company's first real workspace. They moved everything themselves. Noah carefully carried every prototype and design sketch to make sure nothing was damaged. Laura packed the computers and camera equipment. Eric rented a small truck and spent the entire day moving workbenches and production equipment. Tom drove back and forth several times with boxes loaded into the back of his pickup truck. When everything was finally inside the new workshop, the room still looked almost empty. Destiny stood in the middle of the space and smiled. "One day," she said, "we'll complain that this place is too small too." As production increased, the company hired its first employees. Most of them had never worked for a growing brand before, but everyone was eager to learn. Destiny personally welcomed each new employee on their first day and thanked them for believing in a company that was still writing its own story. Even after the company moved into a real workshop, Susan refused to stay home. Every afternoon, she showed up with homemade lunch for the team. Whenever the shipping department became too busy, she quietly sat down beside the employees, folded tissue paper, tied ribbons around the boxes, and helped prepare orders. More than once, the younger employees tried to stop her. Susan simply smiled and said, "I've been packing these bags since there was only one order. I'm not stopping now." Looking around the workshop, Destiny realized something she had never experienced at Copex. This company wasn't growing because people had to be there. It was growing because everyone wanted to build it together. As the company continued to grow, Noah completed the first new handbag collection since joining the team. Instead of rushing it into production, Destiny asked everyone to gather in the workshop for a small internal presentation. The employees stood around a long work table while Noah placed the finished prototype in the center. He looked unusually nervous. Even after months of working together, he still wasn't used to presenting his own work in front of other people. Destiny picked up the handbag and smiled. "Before we talk about this collection," she began, "there's something I want everyone here to know." The room became quiet. Destiny turned toward Noah. "Every design you're looking at today was created by Noah." Noah looked at her in surprise. Destiny continued, "He spent months refining every detail, every line, every pocket, every proportion, every decision that made this collection what it is came from him." A few seconds later, the room filled with applause. Noah stood there, almost embarrassed, unsure what to do. He had never expected to be introduced that way. After the applause faded, Destiny looked around at everyone in the room. "One of the reasons I started this company was because I learned what it feels like when someone else takes credit for your work." The room fell completely silent. "That will never happen here." She placed the handbag back on the table. "Ideas don't belong to titles. They belong to the people who create them. As long as I'm leading this company, every person who creates value will receive the recognition they deserve." Several employees exchanged glances before nodding quietly. At that moment, they understood they weren't just working for another handbag company. They were helping build a company that respected the people behind every idea. Nearly 2 years after Destiny had walked away from Copex Group, the company reached another milestone. Their first showroom was finally ready to open. It wasn't located in one of the city's luxury shopping districts. Instead, Destiny deliberately chose a busy neighborhood where ordinary families actually shopped. "If our customers are everyday people," she told the team, "our first showroom should be somewhere they already feel comfortable walking into." On opening day, everyone arrived before sunrise. Noah carefully arranged every handbag on the display shelves, adjusting the lighting over and over until he was satisfied. Laura stood outside, making sure the storefront looked welcoming from the street. Eric checked the inventory one final time before unlocking the front door. Tom quietly swept the entrance while Susan placed a vase of fresh flowers beside the checkout counter. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doors officially opened. The first customer stepped inside only a few minutes later. Then another. Then another. Some came because a friend had recommended the brand. Others had discovered it online and wanted to see the bags in person before buying. Destiny stood quietly near the entrance, watching customers pick up the handbags, run their hands across the material, and smile as they looked at the price tags. Several of them nodded in surprise before carrying the bags to the checkout counter. For a long moment, she simply stood there without saying a word. Less than 2 years earlier, she had walked out of Copex Group carrying nothing more than a cardboard box. Today, she was standing inside a showroom filled with products that existed because she had refused to give up on herself. Tom walked over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. Destiny looked around the showroom, then at the people who had stood beside her from the very beginning. She smiled, knowing this wasn't the end of the journey. But it was the first time her dream had become something people could walk into, touch, and believe in. Nearly a year after Destiny resigned from Copex Group, the company finally launched the handbag collection based on the synthetic leather proposal Lena had presented. Within just a few months of reaching the market, the first customer complaints began arriving. At first, the customer service department assumed they were isolated cases. One customer reported that the surface of the bag had started peeling after only a few weeks of normal use. Another said the material looked beautiful when it was new, but quickly lost its finish after regular wear. Within days, similar complaints continued appearing from different cities. The customer service manager immediately forwarded the reports to the executive board. Elliot ordered the research and development department to investigate the problem. For nearly 3 weeks, engineers tested the production process again and again. They inspected every batch of raw material, reviewed the manufacturing records, and even visited the factory to make sure every step had been followed correctly. Everything matched the original proposal. Nothing appeared to be wrong. Yet the problem remained. Finally, the head of research and development gathered the executive board for an emergency meeting. He placed 2 samples on the conference table. One was a brand new handbag. The other had been returned by a customer. The difference was impossible to ignore. The protective surface layer had begun separating from the material underneath. "We believe the production team followed the proposal correctly," the R&D director explained. "The problem isn't in the manufacturing. The problem is that the proposal itself is incomplete." Elliot frowned. "What do you mean?" The director opened the original technical documents and pointed to the final pages. Whoever created this material never documented the last surface treatment process. Without that final step, the material performs well at first, but over time, the protective layer loses its bond. The room fell silent. For the first time since approving the project, the executive board realized they had never been given the complete technology. Over the following months, the company assigned multiple research teams to investigate the problem. Every possible explanation was tested, from raw material suppliers to manufacturing conditions and quality control procedures. Yet no matter how many experiments they ran, the results were always the same. The synthetic leather continued to lose its durability after prolonged use. The emergency meeting ended with no solution. The project was immediately suspended while the research and development teams searched for the missing process. Days turned into weeks, but no one could figure out how to solve the problem. One Saturday afternoon, while driving home from a client meeting, one of Copex's board members stopped at a shopping district to buy a birthday gift for his wife. As he walked through the street, a newly opened handbag showroom caught his attention. The display was simple but elegant, and a steady stream of customers was walking in and out. Curious, he slowed down. At that moment, he saw a familiar face standing near the entrance, greeting customers with a smile. It was Destiny. She was talking with a young couple who had just purchased 2 handbags before personally thanking them for supporting the brand. The board member stopped walking. He looked up at the store sign, then back at Destiny. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The young product developer who had resigned from Copex nearly 2 years earlier now owned a handbag brand with her own showroom. Without saying a word, he walked into the store like any other customer. He picked up one of the handbags and carefully examined it. The material immediately caught his attention. It felt softer than Copex's version. The texture looked more natural. Even the finish on the surface appeared smoother. After speaking briefly with one of the sales associates, he purchased a handbag without revealing who he was. As he walked back to his car carrying the shopping bag, only one thought remained in his mind. This couldn't be a coincidence. The following Monday, the handbag was placed on the conference table inside Copex's research and development laboratory. Every engineer involved in the original project had been called in. Elliot stood quietly at the back of the room as the team carefully took the bag apart layer by layer. They examined the stitching, measured the thickness of the material, and ran sample after sample through their testing equipment. After several hours, the senior materials engineer finally looked up from the microscope. "It's different," he said. Elliot stepped closer. "Different how?" The engineer placed 2 material samples side by side under the lab light. "The base material is almost identical to ours. The manufacturing process is also very similar." He paused before pointing at the outer surface. "But this layer isn't," he enlarged the microscopic image on the monitor. "There's an additional finishing process here. It creates a much stronger bond between the protective coating and the material underneath. That's why their bags don't peel like ours." Another engineer quickly opened the original proposal that Lena had submitted almost 2 years earlier. Page after page matched what they had just analyzed, until they reached the final section. The room fell silent. The proposal ended before describing the finishing process they were now looking at. The last and most important step simply wasn't there. Elliot slowly closed the file. "So you're telling me," the senior engineer nodded before he could finish, "whoever developed this technology never gave us the complete process." Elliot looked down at the handbag resting on the table. The answer was becoming impossible to ignore. The missing step that had caused Copex's project to fail was now sitting in front of them, built into a product carrying someone else's brand. Less than an hour later, Lena received a call from Elliot's assistant asking her to report to the executive conference room immediately. The moment she walked in, she realized something was wrong. The entire executive board was already seated around the table. In the center lay the handbag that had just been brought back from Destiny's showroom. Beside it was the proposal she had presented nearly 2 years earlier. Elliot looked at her without saying a word for several seconds before finally breaking the silence. "Lena, I only have one question," she nodded nervously. "Was that project really yours?" Lena forced herself to remain calm. Of course. My entire team worked on it." Elliot slowly pushed the proposal toward her, then explained something to me. He opened the document to its final pages. "Our R&D team has confirmed that the most important finishing process is missing from this proposal. Yet the exact process appears in the material used by Destiny's company. Lena's expression froze. Nobody in the room spoke. Elliot continued. Nearly 2 years ago, Destiny came into my office and told me that project belonged to her. You assured us she was lying and that everything had come from you. We believed you because you'd been with this company for more than 12 years. Lena lowered her eyes. Her hands began trembling beneath the table. Lena, Elliot said quietly, I'm asking you one last time. Who created that technology? The room remained completely silent. After what felt like an eternity, Lena slowly closed her eyes. It wasn't mine. No one moved. Tears began forming in her eyes as she continued speaking. Destiny created it. She spent more than 1.5 years developing the material. I presented it as my own. Another long silence followed. This time, no one questioned her answer. The truth that had been buried for nearly 2 years had finally surfaced. The silence inside the conference room lingered for several long seconds. Elliot slowly closed the proposal and looked directly at Lena. Do you understand what this has cost the company? Lena lowered her head without saying a word. Elliot continued, we invested millions of dollars into a project that failed because we never received the complete technology. We lost customers. We damaged our reputation. And the person who actually created it is now building a successful company with the very idea we failed to protect. No one around the table disagreed. One of the board members finally spoke. Can we still save this? Elliot leaned back in his chair. Only if Destiny is willing to work with us. He turned back toward Lena. You're the one who created this problem. Lena slowly looked up. Elliot's expression remained calm, but his voice left no room for negotiation. You have 2 options. He held up 2 fingers. Convince Destiny to come back to Copex. He lowered 1 finger. Or convince her to sell us her company. The room fell silent again. Lena stared at him in disbelief. And if she refuses? Elliot answered without hesitation. Then don't come back either. Lena's face turned pale. She had worked at Copex for more than 12 years. She had never imagined that everything she had built could disappear because of a decision she made nearly 2 years earlier. Elliot stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Go and fix your mistake. Lena quietly picked up her bag and walked out of the conference room. As the elevator doors slowly closed behind her, only one thought remained in her mind. She was about to face the one person she had spent 2 years hoping she would never have to face again. 2 days later, a black sedan slowly pulled into the parking lot outside Destiny's showroom. Through the glass windows, Laura noticed a woman stepping out of the car. She looked twice before recognizing the familiar face. Without saying anything, she walked toward Destiny, who was helping a customer choose between 2 handbags. As soon as the customer left, Laura quietly spoke. Destiny. Someone from Copex is here. Destiny looked toward the entrance. The moment she saw Lena standing outside, she froze for a brief second. Nearly 2 years had passed since they had last spoken. She had imagined this reunion many times, but never believed it would actually happen. Lena stood there holding a leather folder in one hand. The confidence she had once carried was gone. She looked tired, hesitant, almost uncomfortable. After a few seconds, she slowly walked inside. Hi, Destiny. Destiny remained calm. Hi, Lena. An awkward silence followed. Customers continued browsing around the showroom as if nothing unusual was happening. Finally, Lena spoke. Do you have a few minutes? I'd like to talk. Destiny looked at her for a moment before nodding. Come with me. She led Lena through a glass door into a small office behind the showroom. The room was simple. A wooden desk, 4 chairs, shelves displaying material samples and early prototypes. On one wall hung framed photos of the company's first team working together inside the old garage. Destiny gestured toward one of the chairs. Please have a seat. Lena quietly sat down while Destiny took the chair across from her. For the first time in nearly 2 years, the 2 women found themselves sitting face to face again, but this time, neither of them worked for the same company anymore. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Lena looked around the office before her eyes settled on the framed photos hanging on the wall. One showed Destiny, Eric, Laura, Noah, Tom, and Susan standing together in front of the old garage on the day they officially launched the company. Another captured the opening of their first showroom. Every photo reflected something Lena hadn't seen in a long time. People who genuinely looked happy to be building something together. She slowly looked back at Destiny. "You've built something incredible," Destiny smiled politely. "Thank you." Lena took a slow breath before opening the leather folder she had brought with her. "I'm here on behalf of Copex." Destiny's expression didn't change. "Go on." Lena carefully chose her words. "The executive board wants you to come back." She slid a document across the table. "You wouldn't be returning as a product development specialist. They want to create a new division for sustainable materials, and they want you to manage it." Destiny glanced at the document but made no attempt to pick it up. Lena continued, "The salary is significantly higher than what you earned before. You'll have your own department, your own budget, and complete authority over future development projects." She paused before adding quietly, "Elliot also asked me to tell you that the company recognizes your contribution to the original project." Destiny looked at Lena for several seconds before asking, "Why now?" Lena lowered her eyes. She already knew the answer, but saying it out loud felt almost impossible. "Because we know the truth." Another silence filled the room. Destiny slowly pushed the document back across the table. "I'm grateful for the offer," she smiled gently, but there wasn't the slightest hesitation in her voice. "I'm not going back." Lena looked at her in surprise. "You haven't even looked at the package." Destiny shook her head. "Because nothing in that folder is what I spent the last 2 years building." She looked through the glass wall toward the showroom, where her employees were helping customers with warm smiles. "I didn't leave Copex because I wanted a bigger title." She turned back toward Lena. "And I certainly didn't leave because I wanted more money." Lena remained silent for a few seconds before slowly opening the leather folder again. "I expected you to say no." She took out another document and gently placed it on the desk. "Then there's one more proposal." Destiny looked down at the papers without touching them. Lena continued, "Copex would like to acquire your company." She pushed the document slightly closer. "The board has authorized me to offer twice the current market value of your business." Destiny quietly listened without interrupting. "Your entire team can stay," Lena continued. "Your employees keep their jobs. Your technology will receive the investment it deserves. You'll have access to Copex's factories, global distribution network, and resources. Everything you've built can grow much faster than it could on its own." She looked directly at Destiny. "This is a very generous offer." Destiny remained silent for a moment before finally picking up the document. She slowly flipped through a few pages, then closed it again and placed it neatly back on the desk. "That's a lot of money," she admitted with a faint smile. Lena nodded. "It is." Another brief silence followed. Lena waited, hoping Destiny would finally begin negotiating. Instead, Destiny calmly folded her hands on the desk and looked at her. "Is that everything you came here to say?" Destiny looked at Lena for a long moment before quietly sliding the acquisition proposal back across the desk. "No." Lena didn't reach for the document. "You haven't even thought about it." Destiny smiled gently. "I have." She rested one hand on the proposal. 2 years ago, all I wanted was for someone to believe that I had created something valuable. She paused for a moment. "I wasn't asking for a higher salary. I wasn't asking for a promotion. I wasn't asking for a bigger bonus." Her eyes met Lena's. "I was asking for trust." Lena lowered her head. Destiny continued calmly. "You had that chance." The room fell silent. "You had a chance to believe in me." She spoke without anger, without bitterness, simply stating the truth. "Instead, you chose someone else." Lena couldn't bring herself to say a word. Destiny slowly stood up from her chair. "Today, I'm choosing myself." She gently pushed the folder back toward Lena. "This company isn't for sale." Lena finally looked up. "Not even for twice its value?" Destiny smiled. "How do you put a price on something that only exists because people refuse to believe in you?" She looked through the glass wall toward the showroom outside. Customers were browsing the displays while her employees helped them with genuine smiles. "This isn't just a company anymore." She turned back toward Lena. "It's the life I rebuilt after losing everything I thought mattered." She gave Lena one final polite smile. "And that's something I could never sell." Destiny stood up and walked toward the office door. "I'll walk you out." Lena quietly picked up the folder and followed behind her. As they stepped back into the showroom, several employees greeted Destiny with warm smiles. "Morning, Destiny." Morning, she smiled back at each of them before continuing toward the front entrance. As they passed the design studio, Noah was discussing a new handbag collection with two junior designers. The worktable was covered with sketches, material samples, and prototypes. Lena's eyes were immediately drawn to the labels attached to each prototype. Under every design was the name of the person who had created it. Designed by Noah, hardware concept by Emily, material development by Destiny. There was no single company name taking credit for everything. Every contribution belonged to the person who had created it. Just then, one of the junior designers looked at Destiny and smiled. "Thanks for putting my name on the prototype presentation yesterday. It was the first time my family saw something I designed and actually knew it was mine." Destiny smiled back. "You earned it." The young designer nodded happily before returning to work. Lena stood there in silence. She looked around the showroom one last time. No one was competing for recognition. No one seemed afraid that their work would be taken by someone above them. The culture inside the company felt completely different from the one she had helped create at Copex. As they reached the front door, Destiny stopped and opened it for her. "Thank you for coming." Lena looked at Destiny for a long moment before quietly saying, "I understand now." Destiny didn't ask what she meant. She already knew. Lena hadn't lost to a better handbag. She hadn't even lost to a better business. She had lost the day she chose to take credit for someone else's work. Without another word, Lena stepped outside. Destiny watched her walk toward the parking lot, then quietly closed the door behind her. This time, the past was finally behind them both. Nearly 3 years after Destiny had left Copex Group, the company was preparing to launch its newest handbag collection. Unlike previous releases, this one would be introduced through a small event held inside the showroom. Customers, local media, business partners, and loyal supporters of the brand gradually filled the space long before the event began. Some had followed the company since its first online sale. Others were visiting the showroom for the very first time after hearing friends recommend the brand. Behind the stage, the entire team was making their final preparations. Laura checked the guest list one last time while Eric walked through the showroom, making sure every display was perfectly arranged. Noah carefully adjusted the position of the handbags under the lights, stepping back every few seconds to see how they looked from different angles. Destiny stood quietly near the entrance, watching customers admire the collection before it had even been officially introduced. She smiled as she overheard conversations around the showroom. Several people were discussing how long they had been using their handbags. Others were recommending different styles to friends and family. None of them knew the story behind the company. They only knew they trusted the products. That realization meant more to Destiny than any sales report ever could. Laura walked over and smiled. "Looks like we have a full house," Destiny nodded. "I never imagined this many people would come," Laura laughed. "Neither did I, back when we were packing orders in your parents' garage." Destiny looked around the showroom one more time before taking a slow breath. Years ago, she had stood inside another company's conference room, praying someone would believe in a single idea. Today, she was standing inside her own showroom, surrounded by people who already believed in everything her team had built together. A few minutes later, the lights inside the showroom dimmed as Laura stepped onto the stage to welcome everyone. After briefly thanking the guests for coming, she smiled and invited Destiny to say a few words. The room filled with applause as Destiny walked onto the stage. Instead of standing behind the podium, she picked up one of the handbags from the new collection and looked around the room. "Thank you all for being here today," she began. "This collection means a great deal to everyone at our company." She paused for a moment before continuing. "But before I introduce it, there's someone I'd like you to meet." She turned toward the side of the stage. "No. Would you come up here?" Noah looked completely surprised. He pointed at himself as if to make sure she was really calling his name. The audience laughed softly as he made his way to the stage. Destiny smiled and handed him the handbag. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "this entire collection was designed by Noah." For a brief second, the room was completely silent. Then the audience erupted into applause. Noah stood there speechless, looking from the handbag in his hands to the people applauding him. Destiny stepped back to let him stand at the center of the stage. "Every line, you see, every detail, every decision that shaped this collection came from Noah's creativity and countless months of hard work," she said proudly. Noah lowered his head for a moment, trying to hide the emotion on his face. "Thank you," he said quietly into the microphone. "I never imagined I'd have the chance to design for a company that would let me stand here today." Destiny smiled. "You earned this moment." The applause grew even louder. Standing among the audience, Tom, Susan, Eric, and Laura looked at one another with quiet smiles. They all understood that this moment meant far more than introducing a new handbag collection. It was the promise Destiny had made to herself years earlier finally becoming reality. No one inside this company would ever have to wonder whether their work would be recognized. As the applause gradually faded, Destiny remained beside Noah on the stage. She looked around the showroom before speaking again. "People often ask me what makes our handbags different," she smiled. "Some think it's the material. Some think it's the design. Others think it's the price." She gently shook her head. "They're all important. But none of them is the reason this company exists." The room became completely quiet. Destiny continued. "Years ago, I learned what it feels like to spend months creating something, only to watch someone else receive the credit." She paused for only a moment. "I promised myself that if I ever built my own company, no one here would ever have to experience that." She turned toward the employees standing together near the back of the showroom. "Every handbag we make carries the names of the people who created it, because ideas don't belong to job titles," she smiled warmly. "They belong to the people who bring them to life." Several employees nodded quietly. Some of them smiled at one another, knowing exactly why those words mattered. Destiny looked back toward the audience. "We don't build handbags just to sell products." She gently lifted one of the bags from the new collection. "We build them to give people something they can use every day without feeling that quality is only for those who can afford the highest prices." She slowly ran her hand across the soft material. "A beautiful product should improve someone's daily life, not become a luxury they can only admire from a distance." The showroom filled with applause once again. At that moment, everyone in the room understood they weren't simply listening to the founder of a successful handbag brand. They were listening to someone who had built an entire company around a promise she had once made to herself. The event ended nearly an hour later, but many customers remained inside the showroom, chatting with the team and looking more closely at the new collection. Destiny quietly slipped away from the crowd and walked through the showroom alone. As she passed the display shelves, her eyes fell on the very first handbag the company had ever made. It was no longer the best design they had created. It wasn't the most advanced, either. But she had insisted on keeping it in the showroom because it reminded her where everything had begun. She gently picked it up and smiled. In her mind, memories began returning one after another. She saw herself sitting in the conference room at Copex, waiting for her idea to be recognized. She saw Lena standing on the stage, claiming the project as her own. She remembered walking out of Elliot's office, feeling as though 6 years of hard work had meant nothing. She remembered sitting at dinner with Eric and Laura, telling them she was going to resign. She remembered Tom and Susan telling her it was okay to stop for a while and simply heal. She remembered the little white rabbit that had quietly kept her company through the hardest days. She remembered the old garage, the secondhand desks, Noah arriving with a stack of sketches under his arm, Susan wrapping the company's very first order by hand, and the excitement everyone felt when the first customer placed their trust in a brand nobody had ever heard of. Destiny slowly placed the handbag back onto the shelf. Looking around the showroom now, she realized something she had never understood back then. Losing her job had never been the end of her story. It had simply been the moment her real journey began. As the last guests slowly left the showroom, Destiny walked to the front entrance and quietly looked outside. The evening sun cast a warm glow across the sidewalk as customers stepped out carrying the new handbags over their shoulders. Some stopped to take photos. Others smiled as they admired their purchases before heading home. Behind her, she could hear familiar voices. Tom was helping stack the remaining gift boxes near the counter. Susan was chatting with one of the employees while insisting everyone take home the leftover desserts from the event. Eric and Laura were laughing with Noah as they discussed ideas for the next collection. Destiny stood there for a long moment, taking in the scene she had once thought would never exist. Nearly 3 years earlier, she had walked out of Copex Group carrying nothing more than a cardboard box and a broken heart. Today, she stood inside a company built by people who trusted one another, respected one another, and celebrated one another's success. A young mother walked out of the showroom holding her daughter's hand, a newly purchased handbag resting on her shoulder. The little girl looked up at her mother and smiled. I like your new bag, the woman smiled back. Me too, Destiny quietly watched them disappear into the evening crowd before a gentle smile appeared on her face. She softly whispered to herself, "Years ago, I wanted one handbag to change a company." She looked toward the customers walking down the street. Today, after a brief pause, she smiled once more. "I only hope it changes someone's life." Destiny turned around and walked back into the showroom, where the people who had believed in her from the very beginning were still waiting. Some companies may be able to steal an idea, but they will never be able to steal the person who created it.